basically the ceiling line that's not there, and the upper portion is the roof line. So, and it's more explained in my exterior elevations, which we'll get to. But I thought it would be good to kind of explain the reasoning why I laid it out the way I did.
Thank you.
The rest, you know, this is more, I guess, for HDRB, Historic Review Board, but you get a flavor for the neighborhood, and I think the key plan helps a lot to explain where we are. The other, well, I'll get into the site plan, and you have the site plan, and it shows, I've cross-hatched the area, the exact area that would be the subject of the variance. And I'll put a red. So the red is the area that's subject to the variance. So it's, I think it's a reasonably sized screen porch, you know, not, certainly you could do bigger, you could probably do a little smaller, but not much to make it worth it. It's centered on the building. It's a 0.8 foot variance from what would be required. And then I give you a blow up of the porch and how it relates to the inside of my house. And again, really only just to kind of show this relationship right here, where the opening was that I wanted to go to. Now, it would be helpful at this point to admit that I completely blew the this thing. I'm a horrible form filler on it.
Yeah.
And so I redid it because I realized that the whole middle section was for accessory buildings, which I don't have. That's not the subject for what's going on here. So I shouldn't have filled that out to begin with. I'm the worst. So Mr. Chairman, I'm giving you some revised ones. The numbers don't change. It's just so if you want to go over this conformance chart, the front yard setback doesn't change at all. The rear yard setback goes from 54 foot, 4.5 feet to 44.6 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Still well, you know, over what is required. The side yard, now in the side yard we get into that area of the code which allows me to use the small lot exception. And the small lot exception basically says that is your lot less than 60 feet wide? Yes, mine's 50. Then it says take 50 feet times 4 inches per foot, and you get 200 inches, which equals 16 foot 8. And what the code is saying is that your two side yards that you're proposing have to at least be that or more. So in my instance, I have a 6.7 foot side yard, which is proposed, and I have a 28.5 foot side yard, which is the other side yard to the screen porch. And if you add those two together, you get 35.2 feet, which is well in excess of the 16 foot 8, which the code is requiring. So that's how I can use that side yard, that exception to the code, and how I'm complying with it. So yeah, so the subject of the variance is a 6.7 foot side yard variance where 7.5 feet is allowed. 6.7 would be that distance, and 7.5 is allowed. So I'm asking for a variance of 0.8 feet from the required 7.5. Lot coverage goes from 15% when you're just considering the house to 18.2%, which is a 3.2% rise. But where the rubber really meets the road is for the total lot coverage, which is down at the bottom, where you have, there you have a structure of 40, you've got a, you go from 23.6 to 26.8%, 3%, 3.2, but again, below 30%.
And you have included the new covered deck in that 26.
I included 146 some odd square feet for the porch, plus the area of my house, plus the area of the garage.
Okay.
In red on your sheets, the existing house is 2.5 stories tall, and I'm proposing a 1-story structure, so I'm well within any issues there. And the height of the building is my house. You measure the height on the gable roof to the midpoint of the gable. So in zoning world, that's what you do. So the side of the house, there's the gable. So you go to the midpoint there, and the height is that. And so this, you would go to the midpoint here, and that's the height. So those heights are, existing house is 23 feet, and proposed is 11 feet. So again, well below the 30-foot allowable in that zone, or 35 feet. So I think that's it for the conformance chart. Any issues, questions? Yeah. I saw some quizzical, I know that the small odd exception with the 4 inch per foot and all that, but basically it's, you just take the width, which you've got, 50 feet times 4 inch, and you figure out what that is, and you add up your proposed side yards for your project. And not for the existing house, but for your project. And then you have to show that you are over. So what they're trying, I'm sorry, you didn't say.
So it's you add the 2 side yards together then?
Yes, right, you add them together to make sure that the total exceeds the 4 inch per 50. In this case, 4 inch per foot of lot width, which in this case is 50 feet times 4 inches. So I'm way over.
Let me just interrupt for a moment. It's a couple of things I should have mentioned at the start of this hearing. We need to receive from you a signed affidavit. Do you have that?
For my sign, yeah, I have that. I just did it today, I know I have it.
I have a blank if you need, if you need to fill it out.
No, I didn't. I just did it today. Oh, here it is. Green.
Okay, so this will certify that the sign was in place for the required period. And Donald earlier emailed me his mailing receipts for the public hearing notices to the neighbors, and to me and to Jeff, the clerks, and I checked them, and they're all complete and correct. And the public notice for this hearing appeared in the newspaper last week, and the hearing is exempt from environmental review under SECRA. And then the last point I wanted to make is we have not received any written comments from the public ahead of this hearing. Just curious, Donald, what's happening, what's going on with that little lot next to you that belongs to the village? How did that, is it just used for nothing, or?
Well, it's originally, when we first moved in, it was used for a place where people that didn't have a place to park their car in snow emergencies, they could park their cars there. So occasionally you would see, people parking in blizzards and stuff. But, and it's too small to really build on. So the village, And so anyway, so now you don't see, pretty much everybody's figured out other places to park
Mhm.
if they have a snow emergency. What I've heard is that B Street actually ended at my house originally. And then the land, the Allens gave where B Street comes through to the village, and they put the road through, and you ended up with that slice. So that, I think, how it ended up. So that's what that is. It's great for me and for my neighbor, okay, you know, it's like a little forest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions?
My questions were answered, and there were no public comments, right? It wasn't that you just
We
shared.
did not receive any written ones before the
written.
hearing.
Okay.
Are there any members of the public here who are here to speak about this application? No? Okay, so no public comments at all
Okay,
on the
thank you.
application.
Forgot we were in person for
Yeah.
actual public comments. The inquisical look, if it was for me under the mask, was I was just, as you were sharing variance information, I was still staring at the at what was shared during our warm-up a couple weeks ago with the existing non-conforming lots and residence districts. So all made sense, but that's where my eyes were going when you were describing it. So thank you.
The narrow lot exception.
Yeah.
I've tried to remain, humble. I mean, I'm asking for the minimum I need to achieve my goal.
Yeah, I think the key piece of information that the board members need to know, and you've given it, is why you need the variance, why you couldn't design this deck in a way that required no variance. You've focused on that.
Yeah.
Should we make a motion to do the variance test?
Are you moving that we close the hearing?
I am.
All
That's
right.
what I'm moving, that we close the hearing.
I'll second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, it's unanimous. So the public hearing is closed. We'll move on to talk about 5 factors and see if we can reach a balancing statement. So we're required by statute to take into account 5 considerations on this application. The first one is whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood, or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of this area variance.
My view is that, actually, to reiterate what the applicant just shared, I feel as though it's actually a humble request based on, the preparation. And I do not see that it will impact any negative, undesirable change to the character of the neighborhood.
Mary Ann?
I would agree with that, and it's a very small amount of space that's being taken up by this. So I would say that leads me to the same conclusion.
I agree with both of those opinions. Number 2 is whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. Mary Ann?
I think that he explained it really well, and the walls being so thick that he wanted to be able to use the window to be able to get to the porch, so I I think the answer to that question is no. If that's,
Right. Heath?
Yeah, believe it or not, my initial reading is of the question that it could be sought after in a different way, but as I heard Mary Ann's statement, with respect to the use of the window, for the passageway, and thinking about, for me, materials, I'm in the know.
Okay, I agree, and I think it's useful to remember in this application, as in so many of those that we receive, the applicant is dealing with a house that pre-existed the code, that is placed way out of whack with the code, way over in the side yard. So any work that's done on the house is fraught and kind of handcuffed by the pre-existing location of the house. And so applicants in houses like that are just dealing with a kind of one hand tied behind their back, trying to come up with a usable or workable renovation plan that doesn't violate the code. And I think this applicant is doing his best and dealing with that handicap and minimizing the intrusion on the side yard.
would he say that the walls were 2 feet?
Stoned, yeah. So,
Yeah, that would be something else.
factor number 3 is whether the requested area variance is substantial. And I would begin by just saying, no, it's not substantial. Especially when you take into account the size of the yard and the portion that will be impacted by this addition.
I agree. When I think about the story structure and the total coverage, absolutely not.
And I agree.
Number 4 is whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district.
I don't see a negative impact, no. I don't see an adverse effect.
Mary Ann?
I don't see an adverse effect.
I don't either. Number 5, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created.
Yes, it is self-created.
Yeah, I agree.
That's
Yes.
the element.
So, so when I look back at your responses, number 1, no undesirable change. Number 2, no feasible alternative. Number 3, not substantial. Number 4, no adverse environmental or physical. And number 5, yes, self-created. So all of the opinions support the applications 1 through 4. The only exception is number 5, and that is that factor almost always runs against applications because of the way self-creation is defined, and so therefore it's a weak factor against an application. So I think it's pretty clear. I would make a motion that on balance, the board's interpretation of the 5 factors supports approval of the application.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The unanimous approval.
Thank you very much.
And thanks, Donald.
Appreciate it.
I really like having pictures.
The next item on the agenda is 3 High Street. And I'll give board members copies of the application. So this is a workshop.
Yes.
As you probably know, at a workshop, we review the application for completeness and correctness,
Yes.
but we don't get into the merits of the application. We don't make any decisions.
I see.
We just, and then if we determine that the application is complete or is near completion, we'll consider whether to schedule a public hearing. And that's where the final decision is made, or thereafter, after the hearing.
Okay.
So, take a minute to look at it, and are you two the applicants?
I'm the architect,
All right.
and Liz Whistler is the owner.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Would you like to just summarize for us the nature of your project?
Yes, this is a small house on a very small trapezoidal lot. Liz and her husband Felix are good friends of mine. I've known them the entire time they've been in the house. We've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make it a little bit bigger. And as you were discussing in the previous case with Mr. McDonald, it's such a complicated lot to figure out how to expand the house. The area in blue on the site plan that we've drawn is the buildable area that conforms to the zoning. So the house is, most 3/4 of the house is non-conforming. We've tried to figure out how to add on to the house, minimizing footprint expansion and not making the setback issues worse than they are. But really there's so little way to do that without seeking variances. So we are seeking a variance, a lot coverage variance, a small one, 2%, but setbacks, we do want to expand with a new second floor addition over a existing 1-story rear addition, and that's probably the biggest incursion and impact on the property. But it is also kind of in keeping with the neighboring houses as you go up High Street. All of those houses have rear additions, so it's very similar to the next 2 or 3 houses in terms of its mass and scale. It's a beautiful, charming house too. We're trying to match the character of the house, keep it it's completely at the back, matching the height.
So do you two understand the color coding here? The greenish color is
Greenish color is new footprint,
Okay.
but only a part of that is outside the setback. The blue area is the buildable area that conforms to setback.
Got it. Okay.
So this site plan really focuses more on footprint. One part of this that's I realize is probably not as clear is that we are also asking to make a 2nd-story addition on this 1-story rear addition. So there is this rear addition that would be non-conforming in terms of the setback also.
so that 1-story already, so you're just retaining the same footprint there.
Retaining the same footprint on the 1st floor, but adding a 2nd floor on top of it.
That you're entitled to do, since you're not increasing the non-conformity there.
Okay, good.
I think there are two areas where, two aspects of the code that help you out, that are, unless I'm misunderstanding, and I'll go over them here. Number one is the question of lot coverage. Our zoning code defines the 30% maximum as referring to all buildings.
Yes.
But is it true that you're tearing down a shed, existing shed to be removed?
Yes.
That would reduce your lot coverage, correct?
I did not include that in the lot coverage. I included only the house and the shed that we'd like to remain.
Okay. Let me just go to the code here and make sure I'm getting in the section on R1 district, which is what we're talking about here.
I mean, the existing house itself is already over the lot coverage. It's 37% of the lot.
Right. 134-7, section D, maximum permitted building percentage of lot coverage, 30%. Now, the way I understand that is, that's all buildings.
Yes.
Every structure with a roof.
Yes.
Must be under 30%. So you have a pre-existing surplus there.
Yes.
But I'm not aware that there's any separate regulation of main structure, like any separate maximum there. So it seems to me the way we should be looking at this is total lot coverage, all buildings, accessory and main.
Yes.
And then looking at how that changes. And it seems like that number may be going down.
Oh, because I did not include the existing shed to be removed
Right.
in the existing lot coverage.
You should start, if you look in the beginning of the zoning section under definitions, there's a definition of building area, which includes all buildings. And then there's a definition of lot coverage, which is simply coverage by the building area. So it's always consistently defined in terms of all buildings. There's no separate set of rules about just the main building.
Okay.
So you should first establish current coverage by all buildings, that is, all roof structures, including roof porches.
Okay.
And then determine what it will be after your proposed changes. And I have a feeling it's gonna go down.
Okay, well, that's very helpful advice. Thank you, yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was number one point that helps you. And in which case you don't need a variance for lot coverage. And number two is the narrow lot exception, which Donald was talking about.
You know, I did not find that when I was perusing, going through the code, so.
I'll give you the section number here. It's 134-17E. And your lot is 40 feet wide, right?
At the front.
Yeah, right, it's, so this provision says, assuming that the lot was under separate ownership from all adjoining lots at the effective date of the zoning code, which was, I think, 1964. As long as it was owned separately at that point. If it has a total lot width less than prescribed herein, i.e. less than 75 feet, if such lot is less than 60 feet wide, then the minimum side yard shall be reduced to 7.5 feet, provided that the two side yards shall total at least 4 inches for each foot of lot width. So, a little complicated there, but, so if you have 40 foot width, you multiply that by 4 inches, and then divide it by 12 to get feet. That's 13 and a third feet. So, so your side yards are reduced, your minimum side yard is reduced to 7.5 feet, provided that the two side yards shall total at least 13 and a third feet.
So the one side yard is slightly less than 2 feet only, so. unfortunately, we would not need that.
Uh-huh, right, okay. Yeah, minimum side yard, yep, all right.
Although if it would be helpful, would it be still helpful to make the 7.5 feet on the one side where we have 6 feet, 4.5? Is that gonna make the considerate, affect the consideration? Because then it would reduce the size of the addition by a foot, but.
Sorry, were you suggesting?
Well, I was just asking you if, our narrowest setback on this side of the house is 6 feet, 4.5 inches to that corner, because we're trying to square off that rear addition that didn't currently follows an angle. If we change that to 7.5 feet, it means we're not seeking a variance on this side, but only on that side is existing, but we still don't conform. I don't know if that.
I understand the question and why you.
I don't think that.
Yeah, let's see.
I don't think that makes sense, but.
And it's hard for, I don't know that we'd be able to answer that
Yes.
necessarily.
Well, the minimum side yard shall be reduced to 7.5 feet. But I wonder if it could be argued that they have a pre-existing nonconformity on the north side.
That we're not making worse.
Right, that they're not changing.
Mhm.
And that is already, just as, suppose this narrow lot exception did not exist in the code, we would be talking about a 10-foot side yard. We wouldn't change that because the fact that the other side yard is so small. So why would we change the 7.5? In other words, this exception is always applied to this lot. It's not something that's being applied because of this proposal.
Right. That makes sense.
It's the first time I've encountered this application of exactly this type, so let me know if you guys have a different interpretation how to apply this provision.
I don't. It's unique that the provision was already put in front of us just the last time we
Yeah.
met. And then I actually have a printout of it.
And explained.
What it's
Yeah.
saying is that the minimum side yard, in the case of a certain kind of narrow lot, is changed from 10 feet to 7.5 feet. And so we're just dealing with, everything that we would have said about the 10-foot, we're simply now substituting in 7.5.
I see.
And that applies to the fact that on the north side, they've got a very tiny side yard. And that didn't change the 10-foot. On the south side, they still would have gotten 10 feet on the south side, but now they're just getting 7.5 feet on the south side. Neither of those numbers is affected by the north side. So I'm inclined to read this as saying that their minimum is 7.5. So if you build,
If we reduce the size of that addition by a little over a foot, we would not need a variance for that side.
exactly, you would not need it all. Or if you keep it the way it is, then your variance is simply about a foot.
About a foot.
And it means the other corner, the one that's marked 8 feet, it becomes moot. It's not no variance needed there at all. Does that seem like a correct way to go? And you two?
I'm tracking with it, and I think learning from it.
I'm learning a lot from it. But so what's confusing to me, and maybe not for the discussion here, but when it's the combined side yard setbacks, is supposed to be 13 feet. When do we apply that standard? When you're applying a standard that says, well, on one side it's already doesn't meet code, so we're just gonna apply a standard to the other side, which is 7.5 feet. But when you do the 40 feet times the 4 inches, that's supposed to be 13 feet.
Mhm.
And you can add both sides to equal 13 feet. So I guess in my mind, I mean, I follow what you were saying, it makes total sense, logical sense, but I don't understand how that other standard relates to it,
I think,
or if it does.
I think here's the larger logic here. The purpose of this provision is to establish the minimum side yard. In the case of narrow lots, for which a 10-foot side yard would be punitive, it would be unrealistic. So this provision exists to give a break to people owning very narrow lots, gives them a little more workable space. And all it does is establish a different minimum. And then we just go and work with that, just the way we would the 10 feet. We're just working with 7.5 feet instead of 10 feet. So everything about grandfathered in nonconformity still is valid. All those things are still work in favor of the applicant. And the point of the math about 4 inches times lot width is a test. Because if the lot gets narrow enough, let's see, it's a test to make sure that, let's see, let me read that again. It shall be reduced to 7.5 feet, provided that the 2 side yards shall total at least 4 inches for each foot. Now, is that, such line is less than 60 feet wide, and the minimum side yards shall be reduced to 7.5 feet, provided that the 2 side yards shall total. I wonder if that last clause is actually meaning in practice, like the actual current built status of the side yards, and it's not talking about the minimum. Provided that the 2 side yards shall total at least 4 inches.
Because to me, the way it reads is it negates what it said before, if it doesn't equal the 4 inches per foot. 4 inches per foot of foot.
Well, I initially took that final provided part as a test. If the lot gets narrow enough, 7.5 feet becomes too punitive. Like even 7.5 feet is too tight. So then when the width passes a certain point, then that 4-inch times width formula starts giving you a smaller side yard than 7.5 feet. There's like a tipping point where it reduces it beyond even 7.5 feet.
That makes sense to me without reason to interpret it differently.
Okay, well, let's proceed on that reading, and assume that you have a 7.5-foot minimum to work with on the south side.
So, if I'm understanding all this discussion, which is so helpful, because reading the code, like I'm an architect, so I do, but interpreting the code, trying to understand the intention behind it is very,
We
anyway,
agree.
Anyway, I think I'm hearing that if we maintain a 7.5-foot setback on the east side of this property, and we include the existing shed that we're removing in the existing lot coverage, we don't need variance.
That's correct, according to what we're thinking. I would like to check, I want to talk, think about it a little bit and maybe consult with the building inspector tomorrow
Okay.
on the reading of this provision.
Okay.
But definitely by tomorrow, and then I'll get back to you about
Okay.
if there's any difference in our thinking. But yes, that would be the conclusion if what we're saying tonight holds.
Okay.
Is that what you would tend to do then, rather than proceed?
I would
asking for-
absolutely advise my client and friend to proceed in a way that does not require a variance, absolutely. And, you know, as I've mentioned, we've been trying to figure out how to do this without a variance, and it didn't seem possible, because the site trapezoid is a hard thing to build on. So, I'm grateful for this, advice, and if it doesn't mean, if the conclusion after speaking to the building inspector means we still have to come for a variance for the setback or lot coverage or whatever, we will do that, because my impression is that listening to the previous project, that we really are trying to meet all of those criteria in terms of the impact on the neighborhood and the negative effect on neighbors and all of those criteria.
Mhm.
So we're trying to be reasonable in that way too.
You shouldn't be shy about proceeding if you like the plan as it is. You've already done much of the work toward your application.
Yes.
And all that remains is the public hearing.
Yes.
So you shouldn't feel shy about.
We haven't done the notification or that business, so,
Right.
because this is a workshop, right? So
Right.
after this, you would decide if we would be placed on the next meeting agenda, which is probably in a few weeks, right?
Yes,
And then we would do the
That would be
sign.
the
Okay.
normal procedure.
Okay, well, so I guess what we'll do is we'll wait to hear your advice after speaking to the building inspector, and then we'll decide about whether to proceed or. In the meantime, we can look at the impact on the design about reducing the addition by a little bit.
Okay.
And that next meeting would be September 2nd. Is there a need based on the conclusion with the building inspector that we need to align on next steps due to that?
Yeah, normally what we would do, if you were going to proceed with the variance, we would consider having a hearing in 2 weeks at that next meeting.
Doesn't the notification take a little bit of time for that?
It has to be out by Monday. So basically, we have to make a decision tonight if we're gonna have a hearing in 2 weeks.
So we probably wouldn't make that anyway.
Well, no, you could. That's actually the normal procedure is.
Oh, it is?
The applicant rushes and gets everything done within the next day or two after this workshop. You would just have to get, but if you're not in a special hurry with this project.
It's not that we're not in there, I mean, Liz can speak about the Russia, that I just know I'm not gonna be able to do that, because I'm leaving town, tomorrow.
Oh, okay, well then
So-
that's,
so I know that
then
that's
there's no
not gonna
reason
happen.
to make an over hasty decision tonight
Yeah.
about the hearing and everything else.
I think that's better, right? And you're okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so, if we conclude, based on further thinking about this provision, or you conclude that there is a need for a public hearing, then at the next meeting, September 2nd, we'll set that up.
Okay.
And make a motion to hold it, and then you can do your mailings
Do our
and notifications.
Okay. Great.
Okay. Well, that's.
Thank you so much.
Covers
Thank you.
everything.
Extremely helpful, I really appreciate it, yes.
You're welcome.
Motion to close the workshop.
No need to.
Get a motion, happy now.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Okay, the next item is 33 Fair Street.
Hello,
Hi,
Roger Hoffman, architect. Remember me?
welcome, yeah. This is new to the board members, so you're representing Alberto Mora?
Yes, I am.
All right. Let me just give some background information here. This is a property, 33 Fair Street. That is, if you know that old gas station that's being renovated, if you go out Fair Street, oh, he's got photos there.
Oh, that's so
If you walk out Fair Street
cool.
toward Riverview Restaurant, on your left, just before you get to the old gas station, there's a driveway that leading into a deep property, and it's got this blue, I believe it's blue,
Yes.
green, blue building. So the owner obtained variances in 2012 for a new deck, and the variance was approved. However, the owner failed to subsequently go back to the building department and get a permit, which would have been given automatically now since the variance had been granted. So, but the owner then did the work without the building permit, and now is trying to sell the property. So, and the lack of a building permit has come to light as a fault. There's no certificate of occupancy which would have followed the completion of the work. So now the owner is working with the building inspector to rectify the situation and to regularize this addition, this modification. So the owner has asked us if we will consider approving or reauthorizing, because variances expire. This variance expired 1 year after it was granted, because no permit was granted. So the variance no longer is valid, and therefore he can't regularize the project because technically he doesn't have a variance. So he's asking us if we will consider reauthorizing the variance, and that will allow him to get the new building permit or whatever he needs to do with the building inspector. That's my understanding.
That is a perfect story.
All right. So, and the only paperwork we have, and this is in lieu of asking him to apply for an entirely new variance, like go through the whole process. He could, in theory, apply from scratch, had public hearing and everything. But he's asking to spare us and him that, whether we would consider just reauthorizing. There's a drawing, a site plan on page 2 of this. What you have here is, except for the cover letter, everything else is the decision issued by the ZBA in 2012.
Donald McDonald is just the first applicant.
Exactly, he was chair then. So if you look at the site plan and turn it so north is up, you'll see on the left there, you see the cross hatching? That's the new deck in question. And it was built on top of an existing one-story structure. Yeah,
Is it
that's it.
like
That's it.
The
Yep.
balcony, like,
And built on that.
Yeah, it's
existing-
built on top of that existing one-story. So it increased,
I see.
it extended slightly farther into the side, or the rear yard rather. It slightly increased the nonconformity of the rear yard setback by, you can see the two numbers there. It was, the setback was 13 feet 1 inch, and it became 10 feet as a result of this addition. Now that is the only, there were several other issues which have become moot with time. For example, is it correct that this site plan shows 2 parcels? Is it correct that since then they have been merged into a single? They've been merged and they're now a single. That's what I gathered from the tax map.
Yeah, it's showing a full total of 29,000.
Yeah,
Lot
so
52, which probably includes parcel 2.
so you'll see on the drawing what it looks like. It is 2 parcels with a side yard, but that side yard in the middle no longer exists because this is now a single parcel. So whereas originally this deck intruded into the side yard, and thus the original variance covered that as well, that's no longer a pertinent concern since we have a single.
Right, yeah.
The only concern is the rear yard incursion. see the basis for which the ZBA approved, on which the board approved the request. The board finds the existing house is substantially in the rear and side setbacks already, and that the small scope of the proposed porch and its location so far from the street gives the proposal a relatively small impact on the neighborhood. No neighbor spoke in objection. Not have a detrimental impact on the character of the neighborhood, nor cause a negative impact on its environment. Therefore, the board grants a 6-foot 11-inch rear yard variance from the required 20 feet.
Looks like all board members voted to approve the resolution.
Are there any other considerations here that I haven't brought up?
Pretty much covered everything, yeah.
Okay.
Just, he has his closing, the end of the month, and new families coming in, and they're with children, trying to attend, school. So there's a little bit of a push for getting this all seeable.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't have any reason, unless there was some other precedent that would indicate that we.
I think it's notable how, I'm not aware of any precedent or any other complication. It's notable how invisible this addition is. It's totally, from the street, it's totally invisible. And it's,
Personally, I think it's notable too, because it's one parcel now and not two when it comes to total coverage. But being very familiar too, as just a community member, it's very minimal. So I am perfectly comfortable moving forward in the appropriate way to a vote for approval.
what do you think, Mary Ann?
I don't see any reason not to.
Okay, well, then I'll make a motion that the ZBA reauthorizes the variance of 2012 affecting the rear yard setback.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good night.
Good night,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Wow.
So what happened if they came back? I mean, this must happen, that people will go ahead and build something that, and so what, just in theory, not in this, but say, they come back and then we look at it and say, no, we don't want to approve it, and it's already been built.
Well, I think that enforcement is up to the building inspector. And so we would just report back to the building inspector, and I'm not sure what she does, what her, I mean, I believe she's authorized to do everything up to ordering demolition.
Wow.
If something was built without a building permit, that's, you're not supposed to do that. But I think in practice, building inspectors usually will work with the owner, unless there's evidence of downright, like, hiding of some hazardous condition or something. As long as the work meets
Oh, I see.
building code in every way, I think they usually work with the owner. But yeah, if we decide to deny the variance, I guess that kind of puts the building inspector in the position of having to order demolition, because there's no way to get the variance then, that is needed.
No, yeah,
Right.
right.
The sale of the house
I
is
mean,
contingent.
the owner could could appeal to a higher authority. That's
Uh-huh.
probably what would happen in most cases.
Yeah.
Go to,
Yeah.
there are various procedures for appeal, levels of appeal that they can go to. And then if they lose all those, that's it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Last is the minutes the last meeting. Looks okay to me.
Actually, I found a mistake. The very first sentence, it says the meeting was held on Thursday, June 17th.
We had a date conversation last time we were together, right? I'm trying to remember the wrong chapter number listed. What was?
Wrong chapter number.
I think he had it listed as 117.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Looks good to me.
Then I will move that we accept the minutes with the one correction that was noted.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, can we, before closing, can we take one more look at this section of the code? Because I'm just,
Really?
3 heads are better than 1 and better than 2. So I'm wondering if we can get a better, think through how to read this 134-17E. I thought I understood it, but then when I tried to articulate,
It's,
Your articulation helped me understand it, so.
it's saying,
it confused me.
so it's saying when you have a narrow lot, it's starting with the impulse that if you have a narrow lot, it's unfair to apply the 10-foot standard, because that just boxes people in too much. It's just unrealistic. So let's devise some other rule that makes it more, gives them a break, gives them a narrower side yard. So we'll make it 7.5 feet. If the lot is less than 60 feet, then we'll make the side yard 7.5 feet, provided, now here's the hard part, provided that the 2 side yards shall total at least 4 inches. See, now, suppose the lot is 60 feet wide. Let's apply the 4 inch there. So 60 times 4 divided by 12 gives us feet. And that is 20. Provided that the 2 side yards shall total at least 20 feet. Okay. Well, notice at 20, that's 10 and 10.
Right.
So that means when you hit 60 or less, or if you're more than 60, then 4-inch rule, that's why the 4-inch rule exists, is because it's based on where's that break point between 10-foot side yards. So if you have 60-foot lot, provided this, okay, so it's saying imagine a bunch of lots getting smaller and smaller. When you hit 60, you're still allowed only 10 feet. You get smaller, you're allowed less and less. With each foot smaller, your lot, so let's say it's 55. Let's say your lot is 55. That comes out to 18.3.
Yeah.
So then you're allowed 9 feet and some change. For I think it's meant to give us a sliding scale of reduction down to 7.5 feet. It doesn't reduce any more past 7.5 feet. Is that?
I think your phrase of sliding scale reduction is,
Provided
that's helpful.
provided that the two side yards shall total at least, so it's, if your yard width, if your total lot is 55, the two side yards must total at least 18.33. Cannot be less. So you get 9 feet and change. And if it's 50, which was the case with Donald, it's 16.66 or 8.3. You get
Total
8.
though, it's not 8 on each side, is what he was saying. He's saying it could be, I don't know, 10 and 6.
Yeah, that's right. He seemed to be talking about the actual measurement, like the actual clearance of the real buildings. Whereas I'm talking about,
Okay.
I'm reading this as simply setting a minimum.
Mhm.
But, oh gosh.
I don't think his reading doesn't conform to what I'm saying.
Okay,
I think there's you're right, there's a contradiction
Okay.
there.
I'm a fan of your sliding scale.
but the two side, but then it does say the two side yards shall total
Right.
4 inches for each foot.
Right. It means you can reduce, but as your lot shrinks,
Mm-hmm.
below 60, that's the tipping point.
Yeah.
When it's less than 60, your side yards your minimum starts to reduce from 10 feet to a smaller number. But they don't reduce, they only reduce a certain amount. There's a break on how much they can reduce. And that's the formula. It's that 4-inch times width is the formula that tells you exactly how much it reduces. And at 50, it reduces to 16.6 total. And when you get down to 40, which is what these applicants had, it's 13.3. Now divide that in half and you get like 6 3/4. But they don't get 6 3/4 because this provision tells us it's 7.5. It's 7.5, provided that it doesn't go below, or it's at least, they're not allowed to go down to 13.3. They're 15, 7.5 times 2 is the least.
Total or 7.5 on each side?
On each side, yeah. 15 together is the smallest.
Wow.
The minimum side yard shall be reduced to 7.5 feet, provided that the two side yards shall total at least. Yeah, so you can never go below 7.5. But if your total width is somewhere between 40 and 60, or between like 43 and
Mhm.
60, you don't get 7.5, you get some larger number based on this sliding formula.
So there's a sliding formula, but it stops at 7.5 feet.
Exactly. When
Yeah.
you pass 60, as your lot shrinks, when you hit 60, you're at the 10-foot. There, or 10 plus 10 is 20, so you're at the 10-foot. Then everything below 60, you get a smaller and smaller side yard until you hit 7.5 feet. It doesn't shrink any more than that.
So,
So let me,
that whole total thing is kind of doesn't make sense then. Like what he was saying, that it needs to total that number.
what Donald was saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a further clue that his reading is not accurate is when it says provided that the two side yards. So it's just talking about he was talking about actual setback, like the actual physical measurement from the property line to the building itself. He was saying, well, add those up and it's but that's not what this language is talking about. When it just talks about side yards, that's different from the measurement from the property line to an actual building. That is setback. That is the existing setback. That's not the side yard.
Okay.
Setback is, how far back is the building. Side yard is that whole strip. It's a whole strip which may have buildings in it at various points or may not. So it's like a fixed strip.
Okay.
That's a yard. If you have a building that encroaches like within 2 feet of your property line, it doesn't mean you have a 2-foot side yard there. You still have a code mandated 10-foot side yard. It's just you have a building sticking into part of the side yard.
Oh.
So every property
Interesting.
has a side yard, and it's 10 feet. And but here, unless it meets this exception,
Huh. Wow.
that's how I guess how I would talk my way through this. Any other
That's
points or
helpful.
business or any other?
No other business.
comments?
I
That's
didn't
it.
realize this could be so confusing, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
yeah.
have to see
It's
what.
another language.
I have to
And important to be able to visualize, like, that's why I like seeing pictures and I like seeing site maps, because it's really hard for me to visualize those things in my head.
Yeah.
So-
This language, trying to follow this without a
Is-
picture is like difficult.
Well, it's helpful to talk that through.
So, no other business. Should I a motion to adjourn?
Oh, second.
Okay.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.